friends here have been looking at language from multiple perspectives. They have been discussing the semantics, the grammarian perspective, and also the narrative related to language. But I, as an anthropologist, would be providing a take on language that is deep from anthropology. So as a discipline which studies culture, we see that language is more than phonemes and structures which make up the human conversation or the human psychological processes. We see that the language is basically an incarnation of the culture. And so everything that is connected to culture becomes mobilized, manifest, and active through language. And this intricacy is something which we are going to discuss today. Right. So I have been a member of the Linguistic Association of Pakistan. I contribute for South Asian languages, and I am currently working for Indigenous Endangered Languages with the British High Commission. I think this topic is something which should convey the entire gist of this paper, that is reintroducing Sindhi in urban circles using cultural symbols. So this has been a big project, almost 2 saal se ab, ke I have been working to see different challenges and threats which the language is facing, particularly in urban settings. So I've been focusing Karachi and Hyderabad mainly, but then I have been traveling across 13 districts of Sindh in the field to collect data and evaluate the results therein. So this is a background of the work which I have been doing, and this particular paper is one in the series of the previous works that have been published and presented. It is found that there's attitude neutralization. I think I don't want to repeat what has already been spoken. So one factor which I am focusing in this presentation is that this decline and this attitude formation towards Sindhi in the urban circles is also related to the absence of Sindhi cultural symbolism. So we don't have a kind of symbolic cultural penetrated, and I want to make a moment here to clear what do we understand by symbolic culture and its intricacy with language. You see, this space, the language is built for space making, right? So when you enter space, your brain automatically responds to a certain language which should be chosen and which should be spoken and in that given setting, right? So when you enter KFC, your brain is signaling yourself what language should you be speaking, even if you don't know it. So language has a very materialistic and tangible manifestation in society, and this is what we are looking. So when you're looking at the urban settings in Hyderabad and Karachi, we see a element of Sindhi culture that is invisible. Right. So the previous studies also included a kind of quantified researches on the average speech time in the youth of speech community. So hik nojawan jंहिंजी उम्र 23 खां 30 साल ताईं आहे, उन जा डेटा जेके तक़रीबन 220 सैम्पल्स मां सॼे सिंध मां मूंखे आया. I had been comparing. उनमें I found के approximately 4 working hours a day उन्हनि जी सिंधी स्पीच हूंदी आहे, जंहिंमें 8 कलाक स्कूल जा जेके हुए अर्बन एरियाज़ में ख़ासि करे अंग्रेज़ी में ॻाल्हाईंदा आहिनि, उन खां पोइ मदरसनि या फ्रेंड सर्कल्स में हुननि जी उर्दू स्पीच में डोमिनेंट हूंदी आहे, ऐं पोइ घर जे अंदरि या भेण भाउरनि सां सिर्फ़ु उन्हनि खे इहो अवसर मिलंदो आहे त सिंधी में ॻाल्हाइनि. So the speech time and also the visible language, and I think Sindhi Language Authority has taken that to very much in count. They have been working with the signboards, but that is only limited to the public sector buildings yet. We have not been able to penetrate into the private sector businesses and their language use. So I've been looking at how the spoken and the written Sindhi in these cities has been functioning. And this is what this research is building upon. So the causes are mainly, there are obviously language politics is much involved, and also ethnic prejudice towards the Sindhi speech community. Right. So now what I have found is that we have a way out, and that is introducing these cultural symbols in urban settings in order to positivize and to turn these negatively charged attitudes towards language back to neutralization and then to positive. And we'll discuss this, how this can happen. These are some comparative, studies I'm taking here for a time. This is about Hebrew, right? But the case of Hebrew and Sindhi can be different because Hebrew is protected for some other purposes. So this is from Shlomcha, this is from Jerusalem University, of how the stages in the revival of Hebrew were involving cultural symbolism. So, when the European Jews were settling back in Israel, they found that, Hanukkahs and menorahs and, Jewish ethnic symbolism really triggered their interest in revitalizing Hebrew in Israel. So this is about Canadian Iranians. This is about a study of the Iranian youth in Canadian communities. So they found that Hafsin, kind of tradition they have during the Nowruz, and also Persian art and crafts. That kind of triggered interest in the Iranian youth who had shifted to English to revitalize Farsi in their circles. So the perfumes, the kind of tags which were in French were helpful in making business for Hungarian merchants. So we see that, the kind of cultural symbols which have a kind of relationship with language revitalization. So what the problem is with Sindhi then? So symbols are essential for human communication. We have already spoken. I'm not going into the details. So language is multimodal. Language is not only what we think. It is not only what we speak. It is not only what we write. Language is actually the way we act. And this is why it is multimodal. It transcends the modes we have. Right. So, yeah. So this one is something I really want you to focus. The first-hand exposure, and there's a comparison in the case studies. The first-hand exposure of such speakers in these communities, which have language loss and language shift, have a kind of a divorce from cultural symbolism. They have never had cultural experience, so it impacts your language choice. Can reculturalization in urban settings help in restoring Sindhi's episteme in urbanity? Can we, bring Sindhi back to that popular narrative if we come up with a reculturalization? And then I think, yes, the positive attitude. Okay, so these are from the experiences of the speakers of how they developed attitudes after cultural exposure. Right. So this is a methodology. It has been through a thematics analysis of the narratives. So we have just discussed this, that, cases which did not have any cultural exposure, literal Sindhi cultural exposure, they never experienced the culture as manifest. Their language skills were also, directly proportional to that. Right. Some of these, people narrated incidents where they had a cultural exposure and their language attitudes changed. So even if they were unable to, develop kind of reading and writing skills in Sindhi, it still helped in changing their attitudes. And I have some of these cases from my own students. So this is something, it comes from the institute that I had been teaching English language at. So if you go to these, English learning centers, you'll find that they have a very Western kind of ethos, right? They have Western symbolism. They would have, pictures of Lincoln, or they would have, flags of the Britain, and they would have, white kind of portrayal. So exposure of the Western culture is essential for them to teach English effectively. So institutes which had this cultural, symbolism produced better English-speaking students, right? So we have, kind of that revitalization in Karachi as well. I want you to pay interest to this. This would be interesting, They are somewhat working to reinstall Urdu in urbanity using this cultural symbolism. So this is the kind of, cases you would have. Zalma doodh patti pila de, right? This is a very, urban restaurant, right? And you have, this is being attracting urban populace. And this is the kind of, symbolism they are using. This is ethnic, this is local, right? Jo chai ko muh lagane ke aadi ho jaएं, wo gairon ko muh nahi lagate, right? Right, let's move. Let's look at some more of these, right? How's this? Interesting, you like this? Kabhi ishq karna ho to chai walon se milna, right? This I felt like to have this because there was a lot of talk about chai yesterday. So there's this chai. So some ways in which cultural elements are reproduced to fit in urban aesthetic, right? So this is urban aesthetic, and the language is Urdu. So you see this? This is decor. This is ethnic. This is local. Otherwise, ye log kabhi dhabe pe nahi jayenge. They have brought them in the urban settings. This is furniture. Ye aapko Pathan ki dukaan pe milega, right? These kind of chairs. They have refurbished them. So they are all traditional, but this is a cultural reproduction in urban setting. It still makes you feel you are in urban ethos, but you have this Urdu there, right? The language is doing its function. The form has been changed. So can we make such an experiment with Sindhi is the question, right? Because we are talking about, reintroducing Sindhi in urban circles. The readers of these funny icons must have enjoyed their reading because it generated a positive remark about how fun Urdu is, right? You should feel fun and good about the language you want to revitalize. You need to add, love to that language. And so what can be more interesting than having symbolism? Right, this is, some of the case anecdotes which we have. Right, I never heard so much Sindhi before my visit to our village in Naushero. The way my aunt called me Goodidi wanted me to repeat after her, right? So this is a visit. And this, a cultural exposure which rekindles her interest to learn language. Right. I was so much fascinated by different ajrak designs that it made me wonder, are people in the you can read that, right? So somebody said, I wanted to learn Sindhi after one of my classmates made me try Lolo. Lolo is that, biscuit you have. Okay. This is from my student, one of them, because I used to have Umar Marvi in English. So her response was that after my role play as Marvi, at our institute, I wanted to learn Sindhi. She became interested after that cultural, literary exposure. Right. So if you look at the relationships which have been established from these narratives of, diverse people across Sindh belonging to urban areas, we see, right, visit to a site, right, a cultural exposure. Ajrak, right, that is wardrobe, it is culture. This is how we are relating how the material culture is so much integrated to language. This is where anthropology and linguistics come together. That is cuisine, Lolo, right? And then you have literature, that is Umar Marvi. So exposure to any of these elements, right? Any of the cultural exposures can help you rekindle people's lost interest in Sindhi in urban settings. But you have to do it in the way we previously discussed, right? The way Urdu is being reinstated in urban ethos. Right, so all these can lead to language acquisition, right? In particularly settings like Karachi and urban Hyderabad, and also Sakkar and Larkana to some extent. So language must not be seen only as a grammar or as a, a phonological system or kind of rules, but it is also, very much living, right? It is a living organism of the society. So it should be seen as a cultural incarnation, as a living person, which expands with the living society. So they charge this space with culture, and the after effect language preference is automatically generated, as I previously, we talked about KFC and the kind of messages it gives you. Right, so people from Sindh University can relate this, right? When girls are in Sindh University, they would, have this kind of inclination to call everybody an Ada, right? Even if their first language is Urdu, because in the university, this space, it charges them with that kind of inclination. The culture is so much integrated there. You go and see these Pakistanis in Umrah and Dubai, and they just want to add a phrase or two of Arabic when speaking with Arabs, right? So the space, the setting gives you this interest for language. So coming to conclude, we have seen that, when we introduce these cultural symbolisms in urban aesthetics and the kind of narratives we have seen, this is really going to be helpful, I think, for people working about introducing Sindhi and revitalizing it in urban circles. This is something which has come out of the data from the field, right? This is what over 200 cases from 13 districts have been talking about, right? And this is how languages in the world have been revitalized. Thank you so much for your time.